Hello, everyone, and thank you for having us today. Laura and I had the chance to visit last week, and I've really enjoyed getting to know her, hear from her, and just your wisdom. So I'm looking forward to sharing all of this with you today. We'll just do brief introductions. Laura, do you want to go ahead and go first and tell a little bit about your role?
Sure. My name again is Laura Knebusch, and I am the head of marketing and consumer experience at Georgia Pacific Consumer Products. So we have a number of brands and household paper categories like paper towels, toilet paper, paper plates, and napkins. And my capability in marketing consumer experience encompasses everything from content to media and digital, social, shopper marketing, promotions, consumer affairs, and marketing technology, kind of all the capabilities needed to help our brand teams achieve their brand objectives.
I love that. That's going to be helpful talking about 2022 predictions because you cover a lot on your team. I'm Rachel Bennington. I'm our VP of CPG here at GroundTruth. We are a leading location all screen advertising company, and I lead our shopper team. So we've got sellers that are on coast to coast and serving clients from big box to club to just smaller hyper local retailers. So really looking forward to sharing some of the things that we've come across in our research, and also just visiting a little bit of the trends we've seen in the past and how we see that playing into predictions for the future. So we will hop right in. So we really wouldn't be doing justice in talking about predictions for next year without acknowledging that these past 2 years have been a roller coaster for all of us. And anyone that we're visiting with, I know, Laura, we talked about this last week. We've had so many learnings and had to adapt so quickly in this changing environment. So Laura, I'll ask you just to start out, what have been some of the biggest learnings about your consumers throughout this new normal, and how have you integrated those learnings into your evolving customer experience?
Absolutely. I mean, obviously, as you said, the last 2 years have been a significant change and impact happening. I mean, really starting in 2020, so much disruption and challenge. But it also created a really unique opportunity for brands like ours. As I mentioned, these are household paper categories. These are categories that are very stable, and household penetration doesn't kind of vary a lot. And so while for a really challenging reason, due to the unprecedented demand for paper products during this time, we actually saw a number of new users come into the brand. So it gave us a very unique opportunity to not just continue to build relationships with our current consumers and reassure them during this time period, but to really understand who these new households, these new consumers are in these households, and how to build a relationship with them ongoing, not just based on necessity, not just based on being the product on the shelf, but being the product that they choose because they connect with your brand and what your brand is going to deliver to them. So, kind of coming out of 2020, that was one of our big focus areas. But to do so, we had to recognize the other big impacts that were happening out in the world. Certainly, media fragmentation and the accelerated shift to digital, recognizing that consumers were using media in very different ways. And that was going to mean we needed to shift our strategies to not just how we reached our current consumers, but how do we reach these new consumers? What are the new digital tools that we can use to target them and find them and continue to build that relationship? And then certainly, we talked a lot about the shift to omni-channel retail. So just the fact that consumers were shopping so differently, particularly for CPG, which while had continued to grow from an e-commerce standpoint, saw e-commerce growth, leapfrog 3 to 4 years in a matter of months. And so really making sure then that as we thought about reaching our consumer and, kind of across the funnel, that we were thinking through how to do so kind of at the full funnel, and be able to convert them where they wanted to shop. So I would say, understanding these new consumers and particularly how they interacted from a media standpoint, and then certainly kind of their shopping behavior, all were pretty critical for us in 2021. And we'll hope to continue to inform us as we move into 2022.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can relate with you on the digital side, just having to evolve so quickly in real time in response to what our clients were needing, which is why we developed one of our solutions, which was in-stock targeting, knowing where and understanding where products were in stock and being able to inform your consumers in real time that this store has this product in stock and you can shop here and have a great customer experience. from the great toilet paper shortage of 2019. So with that, with supply chain, I know a lot of people are asking because we've continued to see that supply chain breakdown in 2020 and 2021. What is your prediction for 2022? Do you see that continuing, the logistics and supply chain breakdown of issues that you're facing?
Sure. I mean, I think as you know, we've certainly all seen out in the world, there are going to continue to be supply chain challenges. There are kind of broader macro issues happening that are going to make it difficult. But we have continued to certainly ramp up all our manufacturing, which we've been doing ever since the start of the pandemic, to ensure that we can get the right product to the consumers when they need it. So, obviously there's a lot of things that are continuing to be dynamic. As we think about kind of out in the world and what we've learned in 2020 and 2021. But we believe absolutely we're prepared for that.
That's great. The other thing that I think that we saw during this time, and you touched on this previously when speaking to the new consumers that you saw during this time. What about, we saw a lot of what we call switchers during this time of brand loyalists who for a long time would have been loyal to a product and then switched because of availability. How has Georgia Pacific adjusted to be able to retain these so-called switchers or new consumers? What would be some of your advice if you're a brand out there that has seen some of these things happen, and how did Georgia Pacific lean in on this?
Sure. I think it starts with understanding who these consumers are, and then starting again with what your brand stands for and why you think your brand, how you think they can deliver value to this consumer above and beyond maybe their other alternatives. And so that's been a big focus of consumer experience, is just how to bring that to life across all aspects of how we interact with our consumers, is being very crystal clear on, brand purpose. That's something that I heard Tia speaking about as well. But kind of what does our brand stand for, both from a product and emotional standpoint, but what is it really bringing from a societal standpoint? And then making sure that consumers can connect with that. And again, becomes more than just a product on the shelf. It becomes something more valuable in their lives. So that's probably, I think job one for any brand is, how are you doing that? But then certainly leveraging both kind of traditional tools and tactics that we've had, plus new tools and tactics. How do we actually target and find these consumers in a way that's both efficient and effective, and helping to keep our brand in front of them throughout their kind of purchase journey?
Absolutely. I know one thing at GroundTruth that we tried to adapt is really understanding where these consumers for each specific brand are consuming their media. What screen is that? Is that CTV? Is that OTT? Is that mobile? And where does that really meet that consumer of where they're engaging most? And how can we be relevant and speak to the brand's goals in those spaces? So tell me a little bit about that for you. How has Georgia Pacific evolved with just the where they're meeting those consumers like you talked about?
Sure. I mean, it starts with the consumer and the brand objective, what we're trying to do. And so for a brand that's, where we're launching a new product and it's more about awareness driving, we might think differently than it's a brand where it's really about growing maybe purchase occasions or buy rate with a loyal user. So it very much has to start with that objective. And then it starts with kind of understanding that consumer journey and continuing to inform our understanding, because it is changing. And so making sure that we're keeping pulse on kind of what's changing and that shifting behavior. And we do that through research that we do ourselves, through research that we syndicate, and certainly leveraging many of our agency partners to kind of put together a holistic view of what touch points do we think are going to be most impactful in achieving those objectives. And then, identifying the right mix to do that. So certainly as I think about, moving into 2022, we've seen consumers shift more into digital overall, certainly more into streaming, certainly into more mobile, audio, gaming. So, we'll continue to take all of those into account as we think about kind of the right places to reach our consumers.
I love that. So one of my favorite questions that I always love hearing when speakers are on Brand Innovators is, what are you most looking forward to in 2022?
Oh, sure. It has been an exciting year. We're in such a dynamic, it's such a dynamic, time of in history, I would say. I mean, I've been in marketing for 15 plus years and have never seen the amount of change. So, I'm most looking forward to next year. We have been doing some great work with our brands around really articulating their brand purpose, not changing it, but articulating it in a way that we think is going to most connect with consumers. And we have a number of our brands who are going to be bringing that to life with new campaigns next year. And I'm really excited to see those come to life and understand consumers, reaction and interaction with it, but not just come to life overall, but how we're continuing to do that in kind of the shifting environment that we're seeing out there. So how we're doing that through new touch points and testing and learning, how those new touch points are really going to fit into our strategies moving forward.
I love that. I think that, for my team, it's the same. Being able to respond in real time to the needs, it always keeps you on your toes, and making sure that you are evolving with that and that you're being able to serve your customers best with where they're wanting to engage with those consumers is constantly changing, and it keeps it exciting. So I think that both of us connect in that way with things we're excited about in 2022. With that, how has innovation played a role? I'm very curious, and I know a lot of the audience probably is too. During this time, did you have products that were set to launch that maybe you had to put on hold or rethink the strategy during the past few years? And how does that play a part into 2022?
Sure. I'll talk about it more. I think I don't know that we had anything that we had on hold, but what we have seen is some changing and again shifting consumer behaviors because of the pandemic. Things that like health and wellness, and certainly cleaning behavior, and those play into important aspects of our categories like paper towels, or even paper plates and paper napkins. When you think about hygiene. When you think about just kind of wellness for your family. So, what it has allowed us to do is really, I think, continue to look at our innovation and identify, did that accelerate an opportunity for an innovation we had out there? Was there a way to talk about some innovation we had that we thought would be even more relevant? For example, we launched Brawny Tear Square prior to the pandemic. This is it's not just a towel that you can, tear in two or tear a square, but pick a size, but it's, you can tear it into four. So as you think about all the cleaning occasions people had at home, things like washing hands, or kind of just wiping off doorknobs, like not having to waste a whole paper towel and being able to choose the size of your paper towel became even more beneficial. So being able to talk to consumers about the fact, against that insight made it even more relevant for a broader group of consumers. We're relaunching or are launching a new version of our touchless paper towel dispenser right now, Anovia. And that's something, again, as you think about hygiene, not having to touch that paper towel dispenser, just one less place to have germs. So I think what it did was help us highlight where we had even more opportunity with our innovation pipeline to really address kind of increasing concerns that came from the pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely. And with that, I think the messaging has followed. What we have seen from brands and from our clients is really wanting to think of creative ways to not only reach them on the screens that they're at, but speak that message to them. I know last week when we were visiting, one of the commercials that really stuck in my mind was when Walmart had their CEO, Doug McMillon. He was in a store and he was wearing a mask. His employees were wearing a mask, and he talked about safety of the consumers, safety of the employees, and just really the messaging being very relevant and in tune with the audience that's watching it. And we've watched brands do that same thing. So much to your point of innovation and how it's, with the demand of the time, being able to evolve to that, that messaging goes along with it. And we see that as such an important strategy in 2022 as well. That's great. So let's talk a little bit about omni-channel versus multi-channel strategies. And within your team, you have so many people that you manage in so many different departments. I felt like this was a great conversation when we talked about this last week, just even from a learning standpoint for all of us. How do you look at those two types of KPIs, if you will, of managing that omni-channel, also managing multi-channel, or are they the same?
Yeah, I think today they have to be the same. In the past we might have thought about them differently, and I don't think we can anymore. No, you're not going to be successful in the future if you're not thinking about it from the start as an omni-channel journey. And so, and I think that's what we've tried to do, and where we've continued to build our knowledge is understanding the consumer journey. And there's not just one. We recognize there are nuances to different consumers and their journeys and brands and categories, but getting more knowledge and understanding, where they start even considering brands, thinking about these categories, all the way to where and how they're making their shopping decisions, becomes so important then as you think about truly then constructing a total marketing, omni-channel marketing plan that will, keep your brand, make them aware of your brand, keep them top of mind, have them in the consideration set, and then there, when they're trying to make their purchase decision, in the right place to drive that kind of that final interaction. So it's got to be omni-channel first. While my whole team needs to think omni-channel, we even restructured some roles to make sure that we were really thinking about it in a more integrated way.
I love that. One of the questions that we got ahead of time was really asking about the data. So what data do you find most helpful when you're trying to make some of those decisions, or even with your team? What data points do they really lean on in terms of directing any of those strategies? Anything that you can share in that?
Yes. I mean, I think a big focus of, as I've come into this role, I've been in it about 18 months now, has been on building the right data foundation. In my mind, data is the fuel. It's not the outcome, but it's the fuel that's going to really power us. Then it needs people and technology and other things to bring it to life in a way that's really going to create impact. So one of the first things I did was, do we have the right data sources? And then are these data sources connected in a way that we can tell a story from them? Because what I found, at least in our organization, is we had a lot of data, but they weren't necessarily talking to each other. And if you didn't look at them holistically, you may not make the right decision. And that could be everything from sales data to marketing mix modeling to qualitative research to kind of media KPIs. So the more that we can connect that data in a way that we can understand kind of the more holistic picture of what's happening, the better we'll be able to make the right decisions. And then we needed to make the data more accessible. It can't just be one or two data scientists or analysts who are the only ones looking at the data. In today's world, to be agile and to be more effective, more people need to have access to the data in a way that they can make decisions. And so that's been kind of just the foundation. So it's not just been about the types of data. It's really been like, how do we connect it and make it accessible so that we can really use it in a way that's impactful. But certainly we use a lot of the traditional, as I mentioned, a lot of the data sources I just mentioned, certainly understanding sales from IRI, marketing mix. We've got some other kind of digital attribution things we use, consumer insights, leveraging our agencies where they have kind of consumer knowledge. All of that's kind of building into the plans.
Yeah, absolutely. I can speak on the same on our side, using those data points to really, inform what you're doing and making sure that it's actionable insights that are true and relevant, and even by category, if it's more specific. But feeling like that is going to continue as the trend in 2022 is absolutely, you're right. Data means everything. It's the currency and should be that's fueling you forward. So I've really enjoyed hearing about that from you. So let's talk about the customer journey. I know that one of those things we really connected on is the customer, really understanding that customer and having that set everything that you do, the strategy to anything else that's connected with that. For you and your team, where does that sit? Does that customer journey sit with marketing, with research, finance, advertising? Who owns this, or does everybody own this?
It's a great question, because I will say somebody owns the development of it, but everybody needs to own the activation. So particularly in our organization, when I took on this role, I talked to a lot of different resources and tried to understand, like, how do you even get to a consumer journey? Because we hadn't technically kind of put the consumer journey down on paper. And what I found was there's no one right way to do it. There's many different ways to get it, but kind of just pulling your best knowledge and creating some hypotheses was a good place to start. We actually decided to do some specific customer or consumer journey research, and that was led by our consumer knowledge or our market research organization, working very close collaboration with my team. However, to be successful in an omni-channel world, to deliver a really good consumer experience, everyone has to recognize their role in it, because every interaction can create a positive or negative impact on brand perception and on that consumer experience. So it wasn't, while we certainly have a lot of capabilities on my team, I by no means, am responsible for every, can be responsible for every interaction. So R&D absolutely needs to understand the product experience and how that's bringing it to life. sales from, do we have distribution in the right places? Supply chain, do we have the right product on shelf? Do we have the right assortment and packs? All of these things, play a role, and all those interactions. And so, having it as one thing, I think helping people understand the role they play and bringing it to life is the second, and both are critical as you think about kind of delivering on that, truly kind of positive or, exceeding consumers' expectations with their experience.
Oh, I like that. That's great. And then with the consumer journey, how often do you revisit that? Is that something that is constant conversation? You feel like you have like a quarterly, let's review the data and talk about this. What has been kind of your best practice or advice for other marketers out there on, what has worked for your team?
Sure. I mean, I will, I'll give you my opinion as well as kind of what I gathered when I did a lot of this conversation with others is, if you're going to many people do like a foundational study around consumer journey, but that should be something that there's a lot of longevity to that. Hopefully outside of a pandemic, it shouldn't be shifting a lot, from a quarter to quarter. However, within that, you're going to have key hypotheses or key questions you're going to want to answer around either how impactful is this touch point, or what's the right content for this touch point. And usually that's what you're kind of testing and learning about every year. There might be a couple key things you want to learn, and then you're constantly informing. And it is something that I think as you get additional pieces of information, you can continue to update it. But from a foundational standpoint, I would say that doesn't change. That should be something you're doing every couple years versus something that you're looking at multiple times a year.
Yes, I think that's great. And then following that strategy all the way through, what are some ways that you've been able to bring your teams together to plan out any of your campaigns or messaging to make sure that all departments are really catch that vision for where you're headed and their programs align with that?
Sure. So so again, that comes to some of the reason my team is the way it is today, which is to create more integration among, I would say kind of different touch points on the consumer journey. So instead of just having media in a silo and search in a silo and social in a silo, bringing those together into what we would call more of like an integrated marketing team, so that we're thinking about it from the very beginning as to how the different tactics might play across those touch points. And then working with, again, our brand teams, going back to starting with kind of what's the objective, and then thinking about it in a more integrated way. So I would say that, really making sure we're clear on the objective, and then kind of structuring my team in a way that we can bring together the data and kind of come up with those recommendations are two key things that we're doing to try and accomplish that.
I love that. Yeah, I would say in this past quarter too, as I feel like our suppliers are getting a little bit better handle on, what could this future look like and how do we plan for that? I think one really great practice that we've seen is coming into, once your strategy is set by your team, being able to have multiple vendors that are all going to activate on a said campaign in the room, in the conversation, so that we can see if there's any additional synergies. If you're working with a couponing company or someone who's going to do in-store signage, how can that message be throughout with all of the vendors that you're working with? And how can we create best practices amongst us to be able to serve you even better? So that's one thing that I know our team is really leaning into with our supplier partners, that further takes that partnership that you have and that integration with your team all the way throughout to the consumers, to the vendors, to your end goals. So I really like that. Let's talk a little bit about, let's see, we've got a lot of great questions on here, and I know the audience, we're supposed to leave time for the audience too. So let's talk about in-store versus e-com. We saw during the pandemic this big switch to e-com. Now we're seeing foot traffic start to come back to a little bit more of a normalized state. How has your team approached that brick versus clicks split, if you will, or what your approach is to that?
Sure. Again, I think it comes back to the consumer journey and understanding and continuing to track where they're making that shift. While consumers are definitely back, coming back into the store more, I think what we've also seen is that acceptance of e-commerce, particularly for those who just tried it, during the pandemic is here to stay. So it's really going to become about what is easiest for them, not that we're going to see consumers who are really only doing one versus the other. So overall, as we've looked at our plans, again, kind of starting, all the way to the beginning of the journey, trying to think about the things that we need to do to make sure that our brands are within the consideration set as they come to their conversion choices. Then it's just making sure that we're balancing our investments in a way that we think that we are, delivering the right message or the right incentive to the consumer at the right time. It's making sure as we look across brick and mortar and e-commerce, do we have the right assortment across both? Do we have the right content, particularly as you think about as we get into e-com? Are we supporting it appropriately with things like retail media? Because that honestly can support whether you're online or whether you're supporting kind of what's happening in store. So really just kind of thinking across some of those key tools that we leverage. What do we think is kind of just foundation for helping to drive, help them in their conversion and in their shopping experience. And shifting and kind of balancing that as we continue to learn.
Absolutely. Speaking of retail media groups, I think that this is also a big prediction. The partnerships are going to still continue to grow strong with retail media groups. I know that vendors like us will always look at that as, yes, that is your key partnership. And for us, it's where can we serve you in any gaps or in any quicker activations, or if there's any other KPIs that you have that fall in line with what we do outside of those. For you with retail media groups, where are some of the main ways that you're seeing that partnership really be advantageous?
Yes, I mean, certainly as we've looked at kind of just the onset of omnichannel and e-commerce, understanding the role that retail media can play for your brand, and whether it's, search, it certainly can be very powerful, or from a display, and just kind of, again, making sure that your brand is in front of the consumer as they're making their decision. We've certainly seen kind of the benefit of that. It's not a one size fits all. Like, this is an area where, again, we're doing a lot of test and learning because things are evolving so rapidly. New players are coming into the market pretty rapidly. And I agree, this is something that is this is also here to stay and is going to continue to grow. If you look at any of the predictions, it's going to continue to grow double digits over the next couple of years. So identifying for your specific brand, the role it can play against your objectives, having a good measurement and test and learn plan in place, I think is really important to make sure that you understand kind of how it fits within your other alternatives.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say too, always that important role. We understand that, retail media networks and making sure that you have that strong partnership with that retailer. And that's always going to play an important role. But just to your point, that test and learn outside of where those budgets are committed, it really allows you to evolve very quickly. I know one of the things that I was excited about this last year is, we had a client come to us and say, we have this great TikTok influencer that we're using, but we also have this insight that our consumer is between this age that's also engaging on CTV and OTT. How can we make it relevant there? And so we took that asset and we created a 30-second spot with the TikTok video being featured in the middle, and the product and a scannable QR code for CTV, and being able to do that in real time, because that's where the consumers were engaging, is certainly somewhere where vendors can lean in with suppliers like you in real time that might be outside of your retail media commits. So I think that that's exciting for 2022 and the future too, is just really listening to what are the needs and being able to adapt quickly to those. I can't wait to see what those needs are going to be and how we respond to that next year. So I know that we are close to being out of time, and we've got still option for any live questions. So Andrea, if you're on and you can see those questions, feel free to ask them. But if we see any on our side, we will answer those as well. Otherwise, I'm sure we have a couple great questions here that we can finish up with. I'll give her a minute and see if she hops back on. Okay.
I actually don't see any questions right now in our lineup. So if you had any other additional last ones, Rachel, please go ahead.
Okay, let's see here. Okay, let's ask you more of I would love to hear just, wrapping up things for this year. How has your team really seen ways to finish strong so that you feel like you can wrap a bow on this year and then start next year, full speed ahead?
Sure. I mean, obviously we're in December, so it's really about assessing, to your point, assessing what worked for us, where we did make shifts in 2021, assessing what's worked for us and assessing where the shifts we think are going to continue to happen into 2022. I mean, as I mentioned, like as I think about my key predictions about, what's going to continue to happen into 2022, certainly I think the growth in omni-channel is going to continue. It's real. It's here to stay. It's going to continue, and everyone needs to be thinking about kind of their holistic plans and with omni-channel first mentality. I think media fragmentation is also going to continue to accelerate, a shift to digital, a shift to mobile. So continue to make sure you're thinking about where your consumers' eyeballs are and what that means as far as where you think your brand should be. How do you leverage data? We're moving into a pretty interesting time period with data where we talked a lot about the power of data, but we're also in a period of time where, we might be seeing less data because of cookie deprecation. So having the right data strategies, having the right data foundation, but also proactively thinking about what to do, in the future as the data changes. And then kind of, we talked about just kind of brand purpose and how we're connecting with our consumers and making sure our brands are kind of first and foremost and, identifying, what's meaningful to consumers about our brands beyond just the product. How are we connecting with them beyond just our product in a way that really provides greater impact to their life and greater impact to society? I think these are 4 key trends that are going to continue. And I think they're things that we are going to be watching, as we look to close out 2021 and continue to make sure we're starting 2022 in the strongest way possible.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll echo that. I know that we've really encouraged our teams here at GroundTruth to take that moment to have reflection. I think that so often we're moving at such a fast pace that we don't take the time to really sit back and reflect on what those learnings are, to document them, to learn from them and pivot for this next year. So we are actually scheduling time in our schedules to have that no meeting time where you have that dedicated time to be able to do that. I think another way is connecting with all of our top suppliers and ask them, where can we lean in and do research and be those experts for you? And what questions or problems do you have that you would like us to help solve? And really being able to do some of that data collection. It's the end of the year, so it's really fresh on a lot of suppliers' minds, just like yours. As you're reflecting, you're going to come up with things and ways that vendors like us can lean in and help. And so I think that this is really valuable as you serve customers like Georgia Pacific to be able to do. And then one other way I thought was interesting is we're in kind of executive reviews with some of our top clients. I've been asked by multiple clients, what is one way we're spending money with you that in your opinion is not efficient? And so these are always uncomfortable questions because on the other side, you've got this trusted relationship with your clients and you want to give them the best, but in full transparency at the end, because we are the experts at what we do and we see things that maybe the brand doesn't, it is our job to say, you know what, this is probably not efficient for your money in this way. And here's how we would recommend being more efficient based on what we do and what we do best to help you for the future. And so if you haven't asked those questions of your vendors, we are prepared to answer those. And I hope that, we can all lean in these next couple weeks to finish out this year strong so that we can learn and grow and sharpen each other this next year. Because I think that that's what these last few years have been about, is we're watching in real time what everyone's doing and we're all growing because of it. So that's been exciting to me as well. Well, no other questions have come through. And so I know, Lauren, I would love to connect with you on LinkedIn or any other social platforms. If you see us, connect with us, and I'm happy to answer questions or help point you in the right direction or just give you an honest opinion of where we're at in our journeys, encourage you. And we always find these Brand Innovator Talks to be really helpful in learning from each other. So thank you for being a part today. And thank you, Laura, so much. I really enjoyed learning from you.
Yes, thank you. It's been great to be here.
Thank you guys both so much. I have one last question.
Yeah.
Laura, if you could give advice to any kind of other marketers out there on, what to really prioritize for 2022, what would that be?
Does it have to just be one? Can I make it more than one?
It can be more than one.
I would say, to me, there's in two different areas. One, I would say brand purpose. And again, I think Tia talked about this, in one of the previous sessions, and I wholeheartedly agree. Like, starting with fundamentally, how is your brand adding value, and how are you communicating that to consumers? And that starts with understanding what value is to them, and then understanding the DNA of your brand, and authentically identifying how that can come to life. So I would say, more and more, again, it's not just about the product benefit, it's about that broader benefit that you're providing. And so I think any marketer today needs to understand about the brand. On the opposite, I would say data. The second thing, though, is you need to embrace data, and everybody, I still see people who are like, well, that's data scientists are going to do that, or analysts are going to do that. We all need to be data analysts in some way, shape, or form, because there's so much data out there that can help bring that brand purpose to life in a way that's going to be more effective, more efficient, more engaging to consumers. And so being able to, I think, marry those, that art and science, is really what the marketer of the future is going to look like. And I think that's what's going, and the companies that can do that and the marketers can do that, those are the ones who I think are going to be successful in 2022 and beyond.